Okay, thanks very much. Let's resume. We have Chief Chansons and her team here. We have a little time allocated to run over schedule, which we're already starting to use, so we want to get right into it. Andrew, do you have anything at the outset here? Just turn it right over to the chief and take it away with a presentation. And the council will, of course, exercise its prerogative to interrupt you, but also expect a lot of questions and discussion as we proceed. So, thank you. Push that.
Okay. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. If no one said Happy Valentine's Day to you yet so far, let me be the first. I'd like to introduce the Portland Fire and Rescue Bureau Advisory Committee members present. We have, I'll have to turn around a little bit. We have Frank Ray with us. Frank. We have Chris Bonner. They've all moved on me. And we have Kathy McLaughlin here. Somewhere. A lot of arrows being pointed. So thank you, members, for being here. I'd also like to introduce our core members in attendance today. We have Emergency Operations Chief Dwayne Bray. We have Business Operations Manager Jay Guo. I have Deputy Chief of Training Mark Kale. We have the Division Chief of Prevention Fire Marshal Nate Takara. And then we also have Division Chief Glenn Eisner right behind us. I don't think a year ago anyone could have predicted how difficult a budget we'd be facing this year, and we know that everyone in the city is struggling with the same challenges, so I feel for the task before all of you. I'm sure I'm sure you know that we already have a very lean organization, but for anyone in the room who doesn't know, identifying 90% of our core services as a base with 10% ad packages essentially means cutting core services. So many ideas have been thrown around, discussed, and continue to be discussed. There are pros and cons of all of these proposals, but we've been earnest in following council budget direction, focusing on our mission, core services, and the least impact on citizens. Portland Fire and Rescue's mission is to aggressively and safely protect life, property, and the environment. We provide an extensive range of public services, including fire prevention, public education, response to fire, medical, and other emergency incidents, and disaster mitigation. We serve over 584,000 residents, which increases during the work week to over 700,000 daytime residents from a network of 30 fire and rescue stations housing 40 fire and rescue crews, protecting an area of approximately 150 square miles. In fiscal year 2011-12, we responded to more than 69,000 calls. That equates to an average of 190 emergency calls a day. In the following, I'll present an overview of Portland Fire and Rescue, our budget development process, address the mayor's budget priorities, performance measures, highlight our reduction decision packages and their service impacts, and then allow for comment from Portland Fire and Rescue's BAC member Chris Bonner, Multnomah County Emergency Medical Director Dr. John Jew, and President of Local 43, Alan Ferschweiler. I have approximately 15 minutes or so allocated at the end for questions, but it sounds like it's going to be a pretty dynamic process, so we'll just roll with it. As stated earlier, our mission is to aggressively and safely protect life, property, and the environment. And firefighters care very deeply for the community and the people in the community. So our vision is that our community is safe from fires and other emergencies. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. As stated in fiscal year 11 and 12, and by the graph here, you can see that our responses have been escalating, kind of in correlation with the population. In 11-12, we had over 9,000 reported fires, and of these, 2,000 were actual fires. That's 13.5% of our call volume. 720 of those fires were actually structure fires. That equates to an average of nearly 2 structure fires a day. We responded on over 1,400 hazardous conditions or emergencies, be it electric, gas, or specialized rescue. Over 3,500 calls were for injury accidents, including calls with people trapped in vehicles, rollover accidents, or collisions with Max. And of those 3,500, 900 of those were accidents involving motor vehicles versus either pedestrians or bicyclists. 2,000 emergency calls involved entries into the trauma system, and all of these calls required specialized tools, equipment, and training. Approximately 70% of our calls were emergency medical related, and if there's any acronym I may not be able to avoid because I'm going to throw it out so much, it's EMS, and that's Emergency Medical Services. All the other acronyms I will try to use less, or I will try to avoid them actually if I can. So if you catch me, please call me out on it. Due to our rapid intervention, Portland Fire and Rescue saves people every day from cardiac arrest, from trauma, from seizures, from overdoses, diabetic emergencies, and fires. Because of our staffing, training, and equipment from our 30 fire and rescue stations strategically located throughout the city, firefighters are making a difference in our community, saving lives, property, and the environment every day. And we're honored to do so. This provides enormous efficiencies to the taxpayers on several accounts. We have high-quality all-hazards emergency response with fire and specialty rescue and EMS throughout the city. And because we're trained, equipped, and always ready, always there, there's no need to pay for additional services. We fill many gaps. And if you're not aware, all cities are rated by a private organization. It's called the ISO. I believe it's the Insurance Services Office. And that is for the city's ability to provide fire protection that insurance companies then use to determine property owners' fire insurance rates. Because we have held a long held a strong deployment model, Portlanders benefit from lower property insurance rate. It's difficult to get a concrete answer of what exactly would cause us to lose our rating. We currently have a Class 2 rating. The best rating you can have is a 1, and then they go down to either a 9 or a 10 from there, with variances in between. But it's expected that if we experience the significance of cuts that are proposed at the 90% level, that it would likely trigger a reclass of Portland's insurance rating. So how was our budget developed? We requested employee input, evaluated that, presented that to the BAC. Our BAC, or Budget Advisory Committee, was comprised of 15 members, including 6 citizens, Dr. Jew, Local 43, and Portland Fire and Rescue's core team. We began meeting in December and then continued with 4 meetings through the end of January. During these 4 meetings, we confirmed our core services, we reviewed employee suggestions, and then we reviewed and approved our prioritized decision package list. I apologize, Kezia was also on our Budget Advisory Committee too, so I apologize that I didn't include you. Thank you for being there. Next, I'd like to talk about how Portland Fire and Rescue budget addresses the mayor's budget priorities. Through the past 15 years, we've absorbed over $14 million in budget reductions. We've done everything to keep our city's fire and rescue stations properly equipped and staffed. In doing so, we've reduced all other programs to current minimum levels, so we have a very lean organization with minimal overhead. Despite these past reductions, we're committed to keeping fire and rescue stations operational. Therefore, while not ideal, we restructured several administrative positions. These included restructuring our safety program, where we're eliminating a battalion chief who is responsible for safety oversight throughout the entire organization. We eliminated 2 firefighter specialists from our training academy. We restructured our hazmat coordinator position, which is another mandatory position for us, and shifted that over to our training division, where as opposed to cutting yet another lieutenant, we cut a higher pay position and shifted those responsibilities to a staff training lieutenant. That saves $116,000. Reducing 3 administrative support positions to part-time saves us $110,000. Our administrative costs for Portland Fire and Rescue comprise only 3.6% of our total budget. And pardon me for a minute. I'll review this when we review our decision packages. Protecting public safety. Our budget submission attempts to maintain emergency services at the highest level possible with existing resources. This is what we're all about. Portland Fire and Rescue is the lead responder, incident commander on nearly all emergency response. Anything threatening life, property, and the environment, be it fire, hazardous materials, electric or gas emergencies, natural disasters, including earthquake, flood, landslides, pandemics, Portland, as well as terrorism response. As stated earlier, Portland Fire and Rescue provides efficiencies to the public. Given emergencies are never planned, efficient, or routine, the need for all hazards emergency response is 24/7. With EMS expertise needed in all of these situations, it makes sense for Portland Fire and Rescue to also provide EMS response to citizens. This provides enormous efficiency for taxpayers not needing an additional layer of services. Preserve core services. With our past reductions, we've done everything to keep our city's fire and rescue stations properly equipped and staffed. Unfortunately, that is no longer possible with the 90% baseline. Effective public safety and emergency response requires a multi-pronged approach. No fire and rescue agency can be effective or safe from needless deaths, injuries, or litigation without effective education, prevention, training, logistics, and administrative support. For fire prevention, not only is it the right thing to do and the most affordable thing to do, we're also required by both state statute and city charter to perform fire prevention activities. We're not simply lucky to have avoided catastrophic loss of life, like the recent tragic events in Bangladesh or Brazil. We prevent those from occurring on a daily basis. With respect to training our members, we're also responsible for meeting nationally recognized standards by the National Fire Protection Agency. It's another acronym I'll try and withhold from you or not to drag you into, and maintain required certifications through the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training that ensure firefighter safety through training and competency. Demands on firefighters have increased dramatically over the years. The knowledge and understanding of both past and current building and vehicle construction, hands-on training with specialized equipment so that we can rescue people or stop further property loss, stay trained in the newest EMS care and interventions. And I might add that nationwide, Portland Fire and Rescue is second only to Seattle, nationwide, in saves for cardiac arrest. So we're pretty proud of that. Firefighters are out there making a difference in people's lives every day. And that's something that is measurable, that we can actually have numbers for. Protection against airborne and bloodborne pathogens. And 9/11, I think everyone in this room knows that that day changed our lives, but it also dramatically changed firefighters' lives and their responsibilities. We now have extensive training and equipment demands for terrorism response. All of these demands have significantly impacted our certifications our personnel are required to obtain and maintain. Our Management Services Division provides all logistical support for our fire and rescue companies to respond out the door with reliable equipment, and along with the Chief's Office, provides all necessary administrative support. Our 90% baseline reflects both prioritization of our mission to safely and aggressively protect life and property and the environment, but also the need to prevent tragedies from ever occurring, and when they do, support emergency operations to respond to the myriad of crises that people find themselves in. As the lead responder to most emergencies threatening our community, our 90% base supports all hazard response with firefighters who are trained and equipped as required by nationally recognized standards and are experts in fire response, wildland-urban interface, advanced life support techniques, hazardous materials, confined space, trench, and high-angle or vertical rope rescue, and then every emergency in between. Both National Fire Protection Association guidelines and reports conducted by the National Institute of Safety and Training confirm the importance of crew size. Smaller crews significantly increase delays of critical tasks in firefighting, performing rescues, and on emergency medical calls. This exponential delay of critical tasks has been proven to have a detrimental impact on saving lives. So crew size really matters. Emphasizing government collaboration. Portland Fire and Rescue has long-standing mutual aid agreements with our regional fire partners, Gresham, Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, Clackamas Fire, Vancouver Fire, Port of Portland, Lake Oswego, Sobeys Island, and Corbett. As an example of great collaboration, nearly 40% of our calls were identified from Portland Fire and Rescue Station 31 were identified as responding into the boundaries of Gresham. Because of this, we've partnered with Gresham Fire and Rescue to share staffing requirements of that station. So we actually staff 2 of the 3 shifts, and they're responsible for staffing the other 1 shift of the 3. So that provides equitable cost sharing for our response. We collaborate on services with Portland Police, BOEC, PBEM. Examples include Portland Fire and Rescue CERT medics serve on Portland Police's CERT team. We also, and they assist us actually with a detective in our arson investigation unit. We have 2 fire liaisons at BOEC, and we have a fire liaison who also supports and helps PBEM. We also collaborate with other city bureaus, including BDS, Water, Transportation, and Housing, and regional federal partners, including Multnomah County, the FBI, Homeland Security, FEMA, etc. While Portland Fire has no direct impact on economic development, we know strong public safety services support local business and job creation by contributing to citizens' overall satisfaction with the city, impacting fire insurance rates. Lower rates are better for attracting and keeping businesses in the city. And a city with stable public safety services is an important factor or consideration for people either choosing to stay or relocate. So a safe community is best positioned to be a prosperous community. Performance metrics are important factors in Portland Fire and Rescue's budget decisions also, and I'd like to review those with you now. Response time refers to the time interval from dispatch to arrival on scene. Along with staffing and proper equipment resources, response time is a critical factor in Portland Fire and Rescue's ability to protect lives, property, and the environment. The National Fire Protection Agency recommends a 5-minute response time to all emergency responses 100% of the time. Portland Fire's response time goal is 5 minutes and 20 seconds or less 90% of the time. Currently, Portland Fire and Rescue's citywide response at the 90th percentile is 7 minutes and 6 seconds, significantly longer than the National Fire Protection Agency recommendation and PF&R's goal of 5 minutes and 20 seconds, which is met only 60% of the time. Response time is a critical factor in fire response. Depending on materials and furnishings typical of today's fashion, fires are doubling in size every minute, with flashover, which is the spontaneous ignition of the superheated gases, potentially occurring within 2 to 4 minutes. This will ignite all materials in the area and causes exponential fire spread. Because newer materials are all loaded with, or mostly loaded with petroleum products, burn hotter and faster, structural failure and collapse occurs more quickly. Also, the increased density of toxic and carcinogenic gases released quickly overcomes the individual's ability to escape, and this complicates a firefighter's ability to execute rescue and also fire attack. Response time is an equally critical factor for an emergency where lives are in jeopardy. Permanent brain damage begins within 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen, and when cardiac arrest occurs, the odds of saving a life decreases 10% every minute. Effective CPR, defibrillation, and drug therapy is delayed. Yes?
Excuse me, just in terms of this chart, does the response time aggregate all your calls? So is this an amalgam of fire, medical,
Yes.
other emergency incident?
Correct. And our response time, you can see the second chart there, actually shows the difference between EMS and fire calls, and we're within a second.
Okay, thank you.
And if I might follow up too, what kind of quality assurance do you do? And do you go back and look at the response times and see what the the time from leaving the station or getting en route and look at why some calls are quicker than other, response times are quicker than others?
Yes, we do study that, and the largest variation is generally geography. If we go into the West Hills where we're out of the grid system, then there's a delay, significant delay. It's just a slower response typically. But obviously there are other factors such as congestion, trains, other things that can impact a normally more rapid response if we run into something like that. If you look at this next map, this actually shows our response times from the stations located in there. The round circles are our fire and rescue stations, so perhaps we should find another color other than red for those, because the red is not a good sign for the most part on that map. All of the red area indicates response times over 8 minutes.
And could I get a copy of that?
Absolutely.
Chief,
So do you routinely, if you have a response time that's over 8 minutes or over a certain amount of time, do you have supervisors looking into what happened there?
We track that. If it's over, is it 8 or 10? We actually will track what the delay was. Why was there a delay in that response? Was it into another fire management area? Was it was it outside of our jurisdiction, outside of our boundaries? Like I said, were they delayed by a train? Were they delayed for some other factor? And we track that.
Do you have per fire station expectations for response time? Obviously, it's easier to get places in some parts of town than it is others.
We have our response time goals citywide.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on this subject, we didn't have a chance to ask about this when we talked earlier, but I'm curious about it, and that is, so response almost invariably equals moving a big vehicle through the city with firefighters in it from one place to another. I know we've done quite a bit in terms of Opticom equipment on the signals in order to, but have we looked at the combination of engineering, enforcement, and education efforts that we might increase one way or another to improve the conditions in which that response is taking place? In other words, do our motorists follow the law and get out of the way? Can we help them do that better, either by increasing fines or targeted enforcement by the police bureau or other means? I don't know the answers to these questions and haven't raised them with the chief of police either, but we were just talking about the impacts in the community of drunk driving. There
Sure.
are non-traditional solutions to some of these, or strategies at any rate to some of these problems. I'd be interested in exploring that. If there's more we can do in other areas, whether it's the engineering of our street system and our signal system, or what public information efforts we take on to say, no, we really mean it. You do have to get out of the way when you see red lights behind you and take your headphones off so you can hear the siren.
Right.
And then what do we find, how often do we actually find people for failing to yield to an emergency vehicle, and how bad is that fine? Those are questions I'd like to explore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for, or I don't know. I will look up and find out what the fine is. I don't know that off the top of my head. We do occasionally have that problem. In the most part, people are trying to obey the law and respect that there's an emergency, someone else is having an emergency, and generally they are trying to get out of the way. The headphones is a new kind of a cultural dilemma for us, because that does have an impact. There are a lot of people driving around with earbuds in, and it is blocking out a lot of outside noise, and so sometimes those are the last people when we are struggling to get their attention, to get them to move over. So there are a myriad of factors. We work very well with PBOT. They've been very responsive, actually, to trying to plan with us with our emergency response routes and to keep those free of traffic calming. There are some other issues with some of the traffic calming signals or the traffic calming circles and where bus stops are located. The traffic calming circles can kind of be set up to help the pedestrians bridge across the street, have a safe haven in the middle of the street before they get across to the other side in some neighborhoods. And if they stack a bus stop right there in line with that, that can cause increased congestion and back traffic up even more. And so it's really, congestion is a huge factor in trying to get through some of those primary response routes.
You know, Mayor, during the brief period that I was the commissioner in charge of the Bureau in 2008, we did some ride-alongs. And one thing I also came to appreciate is the deep knowledge that the crews had about alternative ways to get from A to Z. And with streetcar being added, roads being constrained with bike lanes, the bus issue and other things, speed bumps, which are no friend of the heavy trucks. I was impressed with all of the zigging and zagging that they would do to avoid some of the problems you've identified. Chief, could we, following this hearing, get a couple of additional documents? One is, could you break out response reliability by category? So could we get a chart that shows fire, one that shows medical, and one that shows other emergency incidents rather than just the aggregate data?
I hope so.
And number two, could you, I'm a little rusty on this, could you also give us your current data on the percentage of calls by category? So percentage of calls that involve fire, medical, and others, just your current data, and it may be in your submission, but
Sure.
you pull that out.
Just off the top of my head right now, we respond on about 13.5% of our calls are reported fires. About 70% of our calls are emergency medical services, and then there's a myriad of calls in between.
Right. And the other thing that I'd like to request some additional information about is the cost, the fee schedule that's used by the ambulance services for people that we're serving.
Okay.
I think last I looked at this, the ambulance that picks up someone that you serve first because, you know, Mrs. Smith didn't take her insulin or whatever, and now there's an ambulance taking her to the hospital. They're charging $800,000, $900,000 for a 6-block trip, and I'd like to know what that schedule is and also just understand the extent to which there's any cost sharing between the Bureau and the ambulance service.
Okay.
Chief, if you find one of your vehicles slowed down, for instance, by a train, does it have the ability, and would it call into another station?
Absolutely.
And then what is the problem there by robbing from Peter to pay Paul in a sense, not only economically, but also if you pull a vehicle from one part of town that ordinarily...
Did you look at my presentation already? I'm about to get into that.
Okay.
So that absolutely, that's a great question, and we'll talk more about response reliability. But in the case of the train, yes, if we encounter a train, we will alert dispatch, and the crew will identify whether they think that another crew needs to be dispatched, depending upon their location and proximity. Yeah.
Please.
Okay. So lives are saved as a result of Portland Fire and Rescue's broad range of emergency response capabilities, such as to incidents involving trauma, stroke, aneurysm, and diabetes. In motor vehicle accidents or those requiring extrication, the arrival of firefighters to stabilize the patient by securing their airway, provide spinal immobilization, stop blood loss, secure the vehicle, protect from ignition or fire spread, and successfully remove the patient from the wrecked vehicle within that golden hour is dependent upon the necessary resources being available within the critical time needed. Successful outcomes would be reduced with slower response times. The chart before you shows our response time from our current deployment model of 30 fire and rescue stations. Time is critical. So, actually, it was the other one. Sorry, Andrew. So it's everything, and I really kind of highlighted it. So everything in red is a response time over 8 minutes. If we close a station, we can expect the area surrounding that station will experience a significant increase in response time. Our response reliability is the next chart, which shows the measurement of whether or not a first due or closest unit in the fire management area is available to respond when someone has an emergency that needs help. The fire management area is the specific geographic area of the city assigned to each fire and rescue station. If the first due unit is unavailable, Another unit responds from a farther geographic distance, which is what you're referring to. This results in a significantly longer response time generally. As you can see from the graph, reliability has been slowly trending down from the graph on the left. It's been slowly trending down to approximately 90% over the last 2 fiscal years.
So Chief, do you have a breakdown of what the home station was doing at the time that somebody else had to be brought in? Yes,
Thank
that's your
you for
next thing, too?
asking that. But yeah, because we're working on that. We've identified numerous different data collection points that I think would be helpful to present to this group that we haven't collected in the past, and we're going to start collecting, and that's one of those. So thanks for asking that. If we close a fire and rescue station, not only is a fire and rescue company from a station with high call volume, this not only affects the immediate fire management area or station's response time, but the time of other stations now needing to respond into that area to cover emergency calls, and then the delay then that is caused or the vacancy that is within their fire management area. So if another call comes into their area, they either have to get back when they're clearing from a farther location, or then another station even farther away has to respond in. It's kind of a leapfrog effect. So this problem reaches farther across the city with each station closure, obviously. Diversity, equity. Portland Fire and Rescue has made great strides in better reflecting the many communities we serve, but we continue to need to do more. In our sworn workforce, Portland Fire has gone from only 4% minorities in the workforce when Commissioner Hales implemented our firefighter trainee program to 18% of today's personnel from the same program. Giving you credit there. During the same period, our number of women firefighters has grown from less than 1% in 1993-94 to 7% today. So thank you, Mayor. In our 90% budget, we will lose 99 sworn positions and significantly impact our workforce diversity. Next are the programs supported by our general fund. I'm going to walk you through how we've come to the place of actually having to close fire and rescue stations or companies. So I spoke earlier to the significant reductions we've taken over the years. All programs have been reduced as much as possible, yet continue to support legal mandates for prevention and training. Administrative costs for Portland Fire and Rescue comprise only 3.6% of our total Bureau budget. Through past budget reductions, we are a very, very lean organization. Another important factor is in the past, Portland Fire and Rescue used to have 12 rescues to support and protect emergency response with critical fire and rescue apparatus and crews. As an efficiency, during past budget reductions, those rescues have been lost. So we are now absolute minimum emergency response staffing. If you look at the chart, over 77% of our expenses are directly related to emergency operations. Another 7% is logistics, which provides direct support, apparatus maintenance, station maintenance and supply, and then another 4% is directed towards interagency costs.
You don't happen to have copies of this available for us to have in front?
I can get that for you.
All of the graphics that you've gotten would
Absolutely.
be very helpful. Thank you.
Good.
In fact, if I could just make a standing request, because some of us have different levels of eyesight issues. If we could, Andrew, just ask all bureaus that have any graphics to produce them in a large format for the panelists before, that'd
Yeah.
be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize, that font is rather small. The remaining programs of our general fund budget, prevention, training, and business operations, and the chief's office, the combined total of those is $9.75 million, or about 11% of our budget. So after numerous budget reductions, these programs are already thin. What this means, of course, is that the only way to avoid closing stations would be to almost completely eliminate all 4 other programs in order to meet the 90% base. Under this scenario, Portland Fire and Rescue would cease to be able to function. We would not prevent emergencies from occurring in the first place. We could not maintain our training to perform dangerous work safely. We'd be vulnerable to significant liability, and our bills wouldn't get paid. I'd like to refer back to the response map. So in looking at that map, we would be adding new colors to that. We would have deeper shades of red, perhaps purple, at the 90% level. At 90%, pardon me?
Or else you'd have more red. You wouldn't necessarily
Right,
choose
if-
to cut fire stations where the response time is already high. You would go into the yellow.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct, yeah. So at 90%, our service level and capabilities for providing fire and rescue emergency response is dramatically impacted through the entire city. Each closure has a cascading effect on response reliability and response times, and time and proper resources equates to saving lives and property. I'd like to actually now have our
And
budget.
Chief, do we have
Yeah.
data on the current red areas, do we in fact have worse outcomes in those areas?
I don't know if we have that data, but that is important data to have, and we're working on that also.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we have some improvements to go in our data.
Just another question about that map. You go ahead and take it away, but notice that the red's around the edge, a lot of it.
Yes.
So are our mutual aid agreements working sufficiently? Are we being aided as much as we are aiding?
I think they are. I think that if we looked at our neighboring jurisdictions, they would have similar patterns around their edges. So,
So do those response times
And-
factor in that maybe Tualatin Valley or Gresham might respond to some of those areas?
yes, they do. And we have strong mutual aid agreements. And actually, a lot of those are kind of geographically isolated, or again, in the West Hills. It's very time-consuming to get to those calls because we're off of the grid pattern and we're going up and through hills and turns and with large apparatus.
That does reflect the overall response time,
Correct.
including if it's somebody else responding.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank
Yeah.
Chief,
That's the best response to those areas.
if you do have to close stations, what tools do you think will be available to you, and do you have the right staff to make use of those tools in modeling various different scenarios? My staff has talked to other jurisdictions that have had to close stations, and they talked about the various types of software they've used. Since to a great extent it'll be a kind of a traffic modeling exercise, my hope is that PBOT actually might be able to help out to some extent. So I'm wondering sort of what your plans are in terms of determining what tools to use and whether you know which staff you have will be able to spend the time doing that kind of modeling.
Well, great question. There are numerous factors to look at. We'll have to look at our response time, our existing response time and response reliability into the area. Actually, some of it is dependent upon the number of closures that we would have to face. So if you have to close 2 stations versus 4 stations, the modeling looks different. Or it may look different. It may involve the same 2 stations plus 2 additional, or it could be 4 completely different stations and not include the initial 2. So there are a lot of factors to look at. We have a couple different software programs. We have FireSolve and ArcSoft. ArcBridge, thank you. We would obviously try to partner with PBOT to see what type of information they can help us with. We would, Google Maps is not a bad tool. It works pretty well, and we would probably utilize that. And then there's actual drive time of just going out and seeing what the actual drive time is, because sometimes we know that something given from a computer program can be different than reality. And then we've talked to some of our partners about the modeling software that they've used. A couple of them have abandoned some of their models and found that they weren't necessarily as effective as just going over the numbers and looking at their response capabilities themselves. But it's a complicated process, no doubt. And so we would look to It will be a very labor-intensive process, no doubt.
Just, I guess, I think it's a related question to Commissioner Novik's. So again, as an alternative to closing stations, how about having stations that are open for the times of day or night when they are expected to be busiest? So you would have rotating crews, I guess, going to different stations at the time of day. Is that something you've looked at or other cities have looked at?
I'm not sure I understand your question of rotating crews at different stations.
So
Can you
rather than
elaborate?
having a station open 24/7, there's probably data that would say, okay, this is the 8-hour interval where this station is most likely to get calls. And so that would be the 8 hours you would have a crew there. And then there's probably, another 8 hours at another station that crew could then rotate to. So I think that's been done elsewhere, so I guess rather than asking for an answer now, I'd say that's something I'd like
Okay.
to know more about.
We'll look into that.
Okay.
We'll look into that.
I think that that's a modified version of the brownout concept.
Yeah.
Is that
It's very
correct?
close to a utility thinking. When you say
Yeah.
brownout, I was thinking
Yeah.
of sort of the way utilities operate. They have peak loads, average loads. They have to meet peak load, but most of the time, it's an average load.
There have been a series of problems with the brownouts and primarily in the community. I mean, not only that emergencies do happen 24/7, but one of the problems that cities have noted with brownouts is that the community either expects a fire and rescue company to be in quarters and to be there, be ready to respond, or not. And when you have that inconsistency, what has been noted is people then have an emergency and they're desperate to get help and they go to the fire and rescue station and all of a sudden it's closed and they weren't either aware of it or they hadn't planned on it or it's intermittent because, gee, it was just open yesterday. So that is one of the problems. And then operationally for the fire and rescue companies responding, they, when you go on a fire call or a specialized rescue, we utilize numerous crews, and so we pull from that network of stations that are strategically located. So we utilize 4 or 5 different companies to respond on a fire. And when you do that, you generally know who's going to be first and what their initial plan of action is going to be, and then if you're going to be second in, what your plan of action is going to be. And all of a sudden, when you start taking fire and rescue companies out of that intermittently without providing any consistency, it can also provide a lot of operational response issues to the companies themselves. But we will continue to look at all options.
So when you said brownout, that is a term of art
Yeah.
in the fire world, I guess. Okay, I was
Correct.
thinking, when you said it, I was thinking utilities, because it's analogous, but.
We had one of those
Yeah.
2 nights ago, didn't we?
But, I'm saying, intermittent, when you talk about intermittent, I mean, intermittent can be planned. There can be a scheduled intermittent schedule. Anyway,
Yeah,
I'd like to
we
know
can
more
look
about
into
that.
that. Okay.
And I guess, just while I have you, one more question I'll ask. So we have stations, or companies, I should say, company-based fire inductions. I guess what I'm thinking about, the ability of companies to do more of the prevention activities that the prevention division does, too. I mean, it seems to me, from my understanding, as long as they have the truck and there's 4 of them, they could be just as easily doing prevention activities in school-based settings, in addition to company-based inspections, but they're ready to go when they need to go. So something I'd
actually-
like more about.
Sure.
Yeah.
We actually, the companies do participate in company fire inspection on a monthly basis, and so on a regular basis, so they do perform the basic actual fire inspections. The more complicated inspections are tasked over to the Fire Prevention Division, where they have a higher degree of training and certification and can go in and actually address the more complicated issues. As far as being more involved with schools, we're actually just about to sign an agreement with the union to pilot a program where the firefighters engage in both health, safety, and prevention activities with the kids in an after-school program. So we're trying to make a difference on that level also.
Commissioner Saltzman, just to comment on the issue of time. I mean, one fact that we do know is that across the board, the Bureau gets more calls during the day than during the night. So other things being equal, you could maybe make an argument that you're better off closing 12 stations at night rather than 6 stations totally. Now, maybe that other things are not equal and that the volume of really serious emergency calls is even throughout the day, but I think that's one thing that the Bureau might do is look at the night-day disparity and see if there's an argument for closures at night, more closures at night and not entire closures. That would require a reopening of the collective bargaining agreement because right now firefighters work in 24-hour shifts, however.
And having been a firefighter for just about all of my adult life, I will say that emergencies happen 24/7. And when I've looked at our charts for frequency of calls, just about the lowest peak time that we have is probably in between 3 a.m. after the bars close and I dare to say 6 a.m., but it's probably, it may be a smaller window than that because oftentimes at night it's when you do have the people who lay down, their congestive heart failure fills up their lungs. You have the really bad motor vehicle accidents where they've wrapped their car around the pole. You have the fire that nobody sees because it's at night. Most people are in their homes asleep, and so when the fire starts, it advances and progressive, and it's much larger before it's actually seen, and we're not able to get there and deal with the issue in the immediate effect, and then we're faced with the issue of trying to rescue people out from the house because it's advanced so dramatically. So there are complications to it, but we'll be examining all of those things.
Chief, a simple question, and not using the West Hills as a poster child for the problem.
Sorry.
But on any of the narrower streets, if you have residential or any kind of parking on both sides of the street, it can be very difficult for anything other than a very small vehicle to get through. If you have some of your larger vehicles, I don't think they can get through sometimes. They may have to circumvent the parking issue. Has anybody ever thought about, and it might be politically difficult to persuade the residents, to have parking on one side of the street, period?
When we run into those problems, that's exactly what we do, is if we encounter a problem, and then we then report it, and we work with PBOT to eventually try to get work with the neighborhood to restrict parking to one side. So excellent point, thank you. So I'm just going to go through our priorities very quickly so that we can leave time for our BAC and Dr. Ju to speak as well as the union president. Obviously, our priorities are fire stations. We want our number 1, 2, 3, 4 package all include the restoration of our fire and rescue stations. That is our largest priority. The other issues are restructuring our safety program. It's a very, very critical program in fire and rescue. With this restructuring, it is less than ideal. However, in the effort of reducing management and overhead, we're trying to look at creative ways to continue to perform our operations, but to continue to be efficient. And with that position, it would then be dispersed among one position shared by 3 people. That is less than ideal, but it's an efficiency that we're trying to find. 2 training academy specialists at our 2 training academy firefighter specialists. Our dive rescue service would no longer be functioning to support people who are lost in the water. 1 fire inspector who supports the Belmont Fire and Safety Learning Center being open every week. Our 2 carpenters, overtime reductions, and then we have 3 positions where we would reduce them from 0.5 to 0.4, so we reduced them effectively down to a 0.5 or 0.6 position. Those are an office support specialist position, our employee assistance program specialist, and an assistant financial analyst. We're looking at increasing fees and fines. We have not done that in a number of years. The first year, because there's a delay in implementing that, it would only recover $75,000, but we expect in future years we would recover approximately $150,000. Our apparatus maintenance supervisor serves as the apparatus replacement analyst for the GO bond. It is written into that GO bond that it will pay for the program oversight and management of that, so we believe we can recover and shift half of those costs over to the GO bond as allowed. And then I've already discussed about reconfiguring the hazardous program coordinator and shifting those responsibilities to one of our staff training lieutenants. Restoration of interagency agreements back to 100% of the CAL. That's depends on your decisions regarding internal service budgets. And then we've got the one-time requests for past funding, one-time funding of 2/3 of one fire and rescue station and our 2 rapid response vehicles, which includes 4 firefighters working a 40-hour work week. We also have in the realignment, if there were money to move around, potentially working on a data analyst to help us with a lot of our data collection. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and if I could turn it over to first our BAC member, and then I can come back up.
Before we call on Alan and your BAC, I know Commissioner Fritz has some questions she wants to get on the table. Do you want to get those out here now and maybe?
Thank you. And just overall for the budget office, it would be helpful to me for everybody's presentation to get the trend over the last 5 years as to the absolute amount of increase in the allocation to the Bureau as well as the cuts that have been made. And then on the Fire Bureau, the questions I'd like answered at the next session is how you determine the right size for the traveler pool and how does that number compare with the current number? What does the emergency communications liaison do, and what would be the impact of eliminating that role? What happens during the 12 hours a day that position is not currently staffed? I still want an answer to last year's question, which I realize wasn't under your watch, as far as what was the impact of going from the 5 battalion areas to 4 or 3 to 4, I can't remember
3 to 4.
So we since 2004 to 5, the increase in staffing in the Bureau has been from just 10, from 690 to 700, and yet there are 6 more chiefs in that time. So can you reduce the number of battalions, and what, just like we did for police precincts, what would be the effect of that? What would be the impact of eliminating the 2 truck crews as suggested in the first draft of the Tri-Data study? And can we make better use of the rapid response units, particularly in light of this conversation? Could we use the rapid response vehicle staffing for those medical emergencies in the middle of the night? So those are the questions that I'd like answered for next time. Thank
Okay.
you.
Did you guys capture those? Okay.
So
I can
Okay.
So I guess I'd like to sort of build on what Commissioner Fritz said. I wanted to echo what the Tri-Data study had concluded, that we could deploy from lap trucks to fully staff our rapid response vehicles. But I also would like you to look at, and maybe you or the budget office, Police Bureau gave us a whole list of comparable cities they look at for all their statistics. I'd like to know how many ladder trucks these cities have versus how many ladder trucks Portland has.
Okay.
Because I think we have more than these cities, even more than some larger population size. And again, I think the Tri-Data study mentioned that.
Chief, if I could add one additional question. Same question I asked the police chief, which is, if the council decided to look more in the range of 5% and not 10% of cut to your public safety budget, could you let us know whether that changes your thinking about the sequence and prioritization of the add-back packages? And I've had this conversation with other bureaus and have learned that, in fact, it would change their thinking about the mix. And absent that feedback from you, we might be tempted just to go with the cheat sheet you've given us in the sequence of your add-back packages rather than looking holistically at what a 5% cut looks like as opposed to a 10% cut. So if you could give us your thinking on that as well.
Not necessarily immediately, but.
And yeah, obviously, in the future.
I believe we prioritize right. Our first add-backs are our fire and rescue stations. That's our priority and commitment to the citizens.
So in other words, if the council was looking at closer to a 5% or a 4% or something, we should just use the add-back package, the sequence, and as the guide, and it wouldn't change your thinking overall about,
We're committed to our first priorities are bringing back fire and rescue stations.
Okay.
Absolutely.
thank you.
Actually, Commissioner, can I ask, I want to make sure I understand your question since you asked it a couple times. I mean, the guidance we've given bureaus in terms of their prioritization is to sort of look at what they would add back first and what they would add back last. So can I get a little sense, because it sounds like you have some concerns about whether that holds true at different percentage levels, and at least academically, our hope is that it does in terms of what bureaus have put on the table.
I've heard from a number of bureaus that they already feel like they're at the bone. And so they're offering up 10%, and they're working with a back to prioritize, but they're going to passionately argue that there isn't a single cut in there that we should take, and that it has dire consequences, and I appreciate that. But thinking about a 10% cut, and particularly in light of the fact that there are some things not on the add-back package, it's my sense that if one is asked to look at a 5% cut, it might change your thinking about what is in the 5% versus what is in the 10%. At the very least, I don't want to assume that we're just going off the 10% add-back package in sequence. If a bureau director believes that it would fundamentally change the mix, if they were looking at a 5% versus a 10%, I want to give them an opportunity to give us that feedback.
Okay, and that actually really helps me. You're getting a little bit of an issue we talked about last year with some of the bureaus at 8%, and it's difficult just structurally the way bureaus enter their budgets into the system, make requests. But the issue you're getting is that at 4% they might cut these programs. At 8 or 5% they might cut certain programs. At 10% they might eliminate an entire division.
Yeah, and all I'm saying is historically we have treated public safety differently. I'm just inviting the two chiefs to tell us if it would affect in any way their add-back packages if they were told to come to us with a 5% cut, not a 10%. Thank you.
Okay.
So let's invite you to
Great, thank you.
firefighter section.
Can I just ask for a time check?
We are,
We have 2 more bureaus. I know I've
hope not. So what do you think, Andrew? Should we defer the PD&R?
We're scheduled to go till 11:50. I mean, I suspect with BOEC and FPD&R, we may be able to still accomplish that in the remaining 45 minutes, depending on sort of what we have here.
Let's give it another 10 minutes here with this bureau,
Okay.
and then not take a break.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Chris Bonner, and I was on the Budget Advisory Committee. I'm a citizen of Portland. I just wanted to share the thought process of how we approached the task in front of us. I've been on the committee for 3 years, and this was definitely the toughest, as I'm sure you've heard from other people before. It was quickly apparent there weren't many choices, none of them good. Our first priorities were, of course, to preserve the core emergency operations, to preserve prevention services, because we all felt deeply that we prevent a lot of things that luckily none of us ever know about, and to ensure firefighter safety, because we feel like we need to be sustainable in the staffing. We strongly agree also that the training, logistics, chief's office, and business operation needed to remain because they support the emergency response that are essential for providing the public service, so basically the backbone. Closing up to 7 fire stations will obviously have an exponentially negative effect on Portland citizens, and I hear what you're saying about try to think of it as instead of the 10%, would you act differently if it were 5%? I have to say that I feel like there was a very, they tried very hard, from what I could see this year, to look carefully at staffing versus going to the closing fire stations. Of course, that's always the last priority, but I think there was some real creative thinking in terms of shifting responsibilities, and I appreciated that because I think in the past, it has not been apparent that staffing has been really looked at. It's been more equipment, et cetera. So that was appreciated as a citizen. We would like to see the council look carefully at the internal service charges and make sure that those are transparent and cost-effective. That was mentioned by some of the employee responses, looking at IT expenses, the motor pool, making sure that we're making the best of those dollars. We also respectfully recommend that you consider new sources of revenue generation. There are other municipalities that are looking at a safety fee per household. We would rather see that than even closing one fire station. So I appreciate your work on this, and let me know if you have any questions.
I have just one question. Did the BAC discuss the issue of personnel expense, not just people, but the amount of administration, the number of battalions, the
We were
cost of-
briefed on it. So there were 4 meetings that we attended. The first meeting is always recapping what the expenses are, and obviously personnel is a huge expense of this bureau. That is a negotiated agreement between the city and the union. So in terms of the actual dollars, and tell me if I'm not understanding your question correctly, there was a limit to what decisions we could make in that regard.
I appreciate that there was that conversation, and yes, the salary levels, the wage levels are fixed, but then you get into the number of people. And I'm wondering if there was any, and this is for the budget office and the chief as well, comparables with other cities. A third of our staff make over $100,000 a year, and is that normal for fire departments?
Yeah,
And
we
is there-
did
are there
not
any
get into
places-
actual salary amounts and comparing them to other cities, so that was not a process that was done at this
So
point.
was there looking at, other than cutting frontline firefighters, what else in the supervisory structure could be cut?
The supervisory structure was looked at by the core group and brought back several recommendations, of which some are on that chart right there, in terms of shifting responsibilities and eliminating positions. So it was the first year that that has happened in my experience of being on the BAC.
If I can quickly address your comment about the wages, I think that you're calculating in that aggregate with overtime, and that is another issue that we're working to reduce.
And that gets
Versus
to my
base
issue with the
wage.
traveler pool. There are still 31 salaried positions that are over $100,000, so I'm just wondering how that compares with other fire departments
we'll look
and if
into
there's
that.
any savings there.
There was a discussion last year about the traveler pool, and there was an analysis done. Jay could talk about it in terms of comparing what the costs of that were versus alternative staffing. So I know that's been looked at. We discussed it at length last year, not this budget year, but last year.
Good morning, my name is Dr. John Jew. To those that don't know me, I'm a practicing emergency physician at Oregon Health and Sciences University, member of the faculty there. I've been the EMS medical director for Multnomah County since 1995, so I'm sort of an old guy, been around the block for a while. Thank you for the members for some of your insightful comments here. My comments are going to be fairly brief but to the point. Number one, I think Portland Fire and Rescue provides a critical, I would say, service to the citizens of Portland in early response. Everything the chief said about fire applies to medical emergencies. The number of medical emergencies, I would say forgive me for being a little bit medical here, is acute threat to life. If you look at our outcome, and this is from the AMR data, we have approximately, am I cutting out? Approximately 7,000 calls requiring what's called an ESI level 1 and level 2, which is an acute threat to life, of the 65,000 in the county. So multiply it by 0.85, and that's probably the city of Portland. Gresham is in there as well. Of those 7,000 calls, that represents 25% of the, I would say, the dispatch calls as well. So number one, there is a large percentage of calls requiring an immediate full company response, i.e. 4 people to do the job in addition to the AMR 2-people crew. The second one is that our, I would say, quality of care, not to pat myself on the back, is amongst the highest in the nation. We have a very, very good system from a operational and medical service point of view. You name it, in emergency medicine and EMS, we do it as well. We have one of the highest survival rates in the country. We have one of the better trauma systems in the country, and we're working on all our colleagues as far as stroke is concerned as well. Number three, I think if you actually look at I would say survival to the hospital, it's the 3 to 5 minutes, 3 to 6 minutes. That is the sweet spot. So after a certain period of time, you can degrade the response, but it may mean for not as well. I'm going to answer Commissioner Fritz's direct question. We did that MAP study in 2005, 2006. You look at the fringes, it's the fringes we lost people in cardiac arrest. Okay, so there is a direct response. I will provide you the map if I can find it in my computer. It's there. So, Commissioner Fritz, the cost. Fish, I'm sorry.
We were often confused.
The cost of the ambulance is approximately, it's about $1,000 for an ambulance, ALS2 ride in the county. Other communities around $100, plus or minus 100. It's expensive as well. Being I would say a public employee, I'm very cost sensitive, and one of our missions in the Bureau is service to our disenfranchised and people at risk. Portland Fire and EMS serves everybody, including AMR, and one of the problems in our lesser acute patients is that they have no access to care. So they call 911 and they get transported. So that is an issue there as well. So finally, I want to...
Sir, just on the question of cost, if I could, how much of the $1,000 premium, I guess we would say, is the result of cost shifting because of uncompensated care?
Huge. I'm not an economic. I'm looking at Commissioner Novick. He's probably better at asking them, but about 30 to 40% at least, minimum.
And so we should probably put that one over in the healthcare pile that we've been accumulating, because having received a bill for that service, I think it's another one of those examples where the public doesn't differentiate between levels of government, but they get a bill for $1,000.
Correct.
And it's for most families in our community, they don't have $1,000 to cover the cost of a 10-block trip in an ambulance, and the service is not triggered by whether it's an acute care issue or not. It's simply whether the firefighter on the first responder determines that there's enough of a concern to get someone to be checked out. And so I think this cost question we need to take a look at.
Looking nationally, is the most common model a private ambulance service combined with fire and rescue, or is it more common to have a public ambulance sort of service provider?
It depends on size. It's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 is, I would say, government service, 1/3 is public-private, and 1/3 is private as well, completely. So it's all over the board as well. Getting back to your cost, do the contract. Just to reiterate what is obvious to some of you is that the ambulance service area contract stipulates that PF&R receive reimbursement for their non-durable goods, so bandages, IV medications, into tune of about $200,000 a year for that. They also receive joint training in a tune of about $70,000 a year for that, as well as we make a equitable distribution of any additional funds, including the fine funds, to our partners, primarily the fire agencies. So we try to support from the county as much as we can the fiduciary issues within the county.
Doctor, I did not know that, and I appreciate that there's a cost recovery there for materials, but since it's the firefighter that's normally the first responder and stabilizing the patient, has there been some conversation about reimbursing that cost, since they're performing
You're
an EM?
speaking to the choir. I mean, I can tell you over the last 20 years, I am a public, I would say, service kind of person, and I didn't arrange the contract. Someone else did above me as well. So the answer to your question is, I think with healthcare reform, that is a real opportunity to restructure our entire reimbursement emergency ambulance process as well.
And what I've learned from this is that just like the way we deal with first responders and our homeless population, we may have inadvertently created the highest cost, least efficient system here. If the firefighter, which is actually serving as the EMT stabilizing the patient, which is not a reimbursable expense, And the private ambulance carrier is now charging $1,000, which frankly, we ought to open that up for bidding, because I think we could have limo drivers come and do it for a third, and they'd still make a lot of money. In my, to travel in some cases, so we're talking about essentially, in some instances, I'm not minimizing the professionalism of the EMT people, but I know from personal experience, so in some instances, we're just talking about taking someone who is not at risk on a trip that goes about 6 blocks and then billing $1,000. So something seems out of whack here about cost sharing, and I think we need to come back to that.
It's another city-county issue.
Is there any other questions? So the bottom line, I think where we're weak, and I'll outline our weakness. Our weakness is integrating data. We are not as good integrating, especially I have AMR data, but I have every municipality has trouble integrating first response, 911 data, and most importantly, I'm looking at Commissioner Fritz, the outcome data for the hospitals. I need the outcome data for the hospitals, and that's like beating my head against the wall. HIPAA and the hospitals are only starting to break that down. The second one we're weak in is I think we could do a lot better work in dispatching. The dispatch criteria is inefficient. We could do a lot better job in determining what resources are needed. So the key is at dispatch. And the part of the problem is that I can't do part of the job because I need the hospital outcomes to the patient in order to determine the cards that are out there. Finally, I think we as a health community, almost all of you are aware of the healthcare reform, we need to do a better job at allocating the right resources to the right medical problem. And this is the CCO model that I believe you're all aware of. Those are I would say, the primary challenges that are going to be facing our community in the next 5 years.
And Dr. Ju, thank you for your work in revising the dispatch protocols at BOAC for some of the issues that we deal with, and we look forward to continuing to work with you on that.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Alan?
Thank you. For the record, Alan Fershaller, President, Portland Firefighter Association. And I just wanted to discuss some of the impacts that you guys are discussing here. And I won't even go back too far, but let's start on Monday. And on Monday at 7:16 a.m., is this intermittent? Okay.
If it's any consolation, Alan, we've upgraded our sound system.
Good. It looks good. And so at 7:16 a.m. on Monday, we were dispatched for a fire on Southeast 99th. And at 7:21, your fire crews arrived, and within 9 minutes, we pulled a person out of that structure. So we were underneath that 5 minutes. That person, unfortunately, did not make it. He passed away at about 11 a.m. on Monday. The point is that we look at closing stations, or we look at closing truck companies. That 5-minute window is no longer there. Another fire southeast in November, early November, one person did perish in that. Truck 7 was able to ladder the second story and pull 2 people out within 8 minutes of arriving, and they arrived within 3 minutes. And you look at that again, one more example I'll give you. In December, over 50% of the people that we were transported, that we did CPR on, arrived at the hospital with a pulse and a blood pressure. Absolutely amazing numbers in what we're doing. And all that responds to is the response time. Your risk-benefit scenario that you guys are looking at, I don't envy the position you're in, but I just would like to advocate how important response times are and how good you guys are doing to help save everybody that you can as citizens and what your Fire Bureau is doing for you. And I'd like to answer any questions if you did have any.
Questions for Alan at this point? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chief and team, for a good presentation. Obviously, we've captured a number of questions that we'll need follow-up from you on. So we'll look forward to the next phase. Thank you.
You're revising our schedule.
Yeah, we're going to move immediately to BOAC, and then we're going to postpone FPD&R until another session so that we have 30 minutes or so here with BOAC.